Welcome to CivilNet TV. This is where we try to bring you a summary of the day's events in Armenia and around the region. Most of our news today is of a regional interest, except for one, and the one is that a recent strand of robberies taking place in Yerevan that had many worried that, in fact, that too, robbery and thievery, which has been rare in the city, has taken off. Today, the authorities were able to capture about 8 individuals thought to be accomplices in this effort that has been going on through the city for well over half a year. Most stories up to this point, unconfirmed, have named a few names, many of whom, as it turns out, are the children of important government officials, ministers, heads of important government agencies. And so the news that as it develops over the next several days is going to take on a couple of interesting turns. One is that social aspect, those who are involved, and the other is in fact watching to see how the justice system will follow this very unusual sort of case. The other news items today are of a regional nature. One is that today at the United Nations General Assembly, both the presidents of Turkey and Georgia have made their statements. Later today, on the 23rd, President Serge Sargsyan is expected to make his statement at the United Nations. Today, Abkhazia, a breakaway region of Georgia, was recognized by Tuvalu, an island state in the Pacific. The reason that information is interesting is because Abkhazia's story, history, may in fact in some ways be paralleling Qarapagh's, and it's interesting to see how states recognize the self-determination efforts of other states. It's also interesting because Tuvalu is the island state whose internet domain, .tv, is the one that we use. Tuvalu's national budget is replenished to the tune of about $1 million a year because it has sold off that name and receives royalties, and we've benefited from that. So CivilNet.tv is who we are, and we are bringing you not just a summary of today's news, but also what we think will be a very interesting interview. I hope you find to be an interesting interview, a talk that I had earlier today with former U.S. Ambassador to Armenia, Mr. John Evans. This is John Evans's first return to Armenia in 5 years. He left about 5 years ago, this month in fact, and he's back now at the invitation of the Civilitas Foundation. He'll participate in a couple of public events. He speaks today with us about general impressions, his leaving Armenia 5 years ago, and we'll continue to talk to him about the genocide issue, about Armenia-Turkey relations, and others. In the background, you may be able to hear, in fact, the beginning of a meeting, rally, demonstration that Levon Ter-Bedrosyan and the Armenian National Congress are holding tonight here in Yerevan, and we'll bring you more information about that later. But first, the interview with former Ambassador John Evans. Ambassador John Evans, welcome back to Armenia, welcome to Civilitas, welcome to CivilNet.
Good morning.
When you left Armenia, you left under blank circumstances. What would you say?
I'd say unusual. It was 5 years ago this month, in fact.
It was this month?
Yes.
Well, we did well to invite you now.
Good timing.
In retrospect, any regrets?
No regrets. I did not make a slip of the tongue. I knew what I was doing. I knew why I was doing it. And I knew there would be consequences. I didn't know precisely what the consequences would be. I knew there would be a range of consequences, anything from having my head cut off to a slap on the wrist, and in the end it was something in the middle, and of course I wasn't removed immediately. I served another 18 months, and I think we did some good work in those days.
What exactly did you say?
Well, I was invited in February 2005, having served in Armenia for 6 months, to tour a number of areas in the United States where there are many Armenian Americans. My predecessor, John Ordway, had done the same thing.
Yes.
And
the communities really appreciated that.
Well, it's an important part of our work, I think, is to stay in touch with Armenians in the United States. There are citizens, there are taxpayers, they're more interested in Armenia than anybody else, and we get good value when we are able to cooperate with them. Of course, the question of the Armenian genocide came up, and I said basically, look, I believe that what happened between 1915 and 1919 was a genocide. The word had not yet been invented. That happened only later. The convention was not in force, the 1948 convention about genocide, but the events that took place fit that description fully. And so I think that we ought to call a spade, but we should also recognize that Turkey is a very important country, that Armenia needs relations with Turkey, and so on. In short, I didn't simply use the word genocide either for effect or for shock value. I put it in a full context. And I fear, my only regret is this, that I think some people only heard the word genocide and didn't hear everything else I was trying to say.
Was your intent to spark a fire? Was your intent to open a discussion, to sleep better at night?
It was a number of things. First of all, I had tried unsuccessfully within the State Department to get the State Department to be more forthcoming about this issue, not to treat it as a taboo that cannot be discussed. I wanted to move the State Department as far as the White House. This was the George Bush White House.
Yes, it was.
The George Bush White House was far more understanding and forthcoming on this issue than the State Department.
Why do you think?
Bureaucracy, and maybe a tin ear for some human rights issues to a certain extent. I was unsuccessful within the State Department system, and I really, this was the 90th anniversary, remember, of 1915. This was 2005.
Yes.
And I thought it was high time. We've been going around telling governments all over the world that they should listen to civil society. Well, civil society in the form of experts, academic people, public intellectuals, including people like Orhan Pamuk in Turkey, have all been saying that this was a terrible event, that it was a genocide. And the US government is unable to say it. It struck me as absolutely outrageous.
You know, this is interesting that we're having this discussion post-WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks in many ways demonstrated that the servants on the ground, those who with the political ear on the ground, do hear things, sometimes right, sometimes wrong, send them to the Capitol, and it's not always that that influences policy.
Well, of course. Foreign service officers of all countries do their best to inform themselves as to what's going on.
That's why they're there.
That's why they're there. They're not quite the same as journalists because they try to judge intentions. But you'll notice in the WikiLeaks, at least in American telegrams from the field, we always report the facts and then there may be a comment.
Right.
And so that's just the way our newspapers work. The facts come first and then there's an editorial page, which I think is very important. Not to mix facts and commentary all together and confuse people. I'm quite, although I deplore this breach of confidentiality, because I do believe that diplomacy needs to be conducted in confidence. So I deplore what happened. I believe the problem has been fixed, by the way.
In what way?
Should not happen
Nobody's
again.
going to write anything anymore.
No. The provision of sharing these telegrams, which made their loss possible, has been stopped. I mean, it came down, unfortunately, to a funding issue. The State Department was under pressure to share its products more widely after the attack on the World Trade Center to make sure that nobody was missing anything. The State Department could not afford to set up its own sharing mechanism, so it shipped a lot of these telegrams into the Defense Department's so-called SIPRNet, which was a very wide method of sharing things, as we now know, down to very junior levels, and that's what caused the problem. That's been fixed.
Well, seems to me part of the problem is also assuming that distribution necessarily means better judgment and evaluation, but that's a different discussion.
Yes, but on your question there, of course, people in Washington have, or any capital, have access to many sources of information. Sure. If they're smart, they'll listen to their ambassadors, because a story... That's
why they're there.
That's right, they're there, and they talk to people who know, and they exchange ideas, and they can talk about hypothetical situations and have serious conversations. And that's precisely why these conversations should be protected. It's not that there's any hanky-panky or bad faith. It's just like family correspondence.
But you were saying you don't think the outcome is necessarily a bad thing, although you said you deplored the...
What I would say is this. Although I deplore the breach of confidentiality, I must say I think the things we've seen stand up very well as products of good work by our Foreign Service. And to some extent, the American public in particular, I think, should be pleased that their employees in the field are doing such a good job.
Well, I think in the Armenian public, in many ways, has learned how sometimes messages do get there and sometimes they don't, but on the other hand, how this whole process is so beautifully institutionalized in the American system. It's all there. It's just independent of the individual.
I think that your listeners, if they look at the WikiLeaks and they think back to what they knew about the times that are being described, they'll see that there's a rough correspondence. We were seeing the same things that they were. Just as in Tunisia, the
Yes.
American embassy was reporting on the financial
playings and
crimes
involvements
of the ruling family, and they were seeing the same things that,
Sure.
that Tunisians saw.
You've been in Armenia now for a few days. What kinds of questions are people asking you? What are your reactions?
Well, my reactions are that things are looking very nice here in Yerevan. There are a lot of buildings that have been spruced up. The streets are looking well. There have been improvements in traffic flow in some cases, although there's more traffic. So I see positive outer signs, lots of beautiful new construction. I haven't been outside Yerevan, and I've always worried about the discrepancy between
Sure.
Yerevan and smaller towns and the countryside. So I won't have time to get out of Yerevan on this trip, I'm afraid.
Will you have time? You'll come back.
I certainly hope to, and as does my wife, who couldn't come this time.
And will Gharabagh be on the list of possible visits?
Not this time. I will share with you, though, that I went with my wife a few days ago in Washington to the event on Capitol Hill, which was marking 20 years of the existence of the Karabakh Republic. And so we went there to inform ourselves, and we'll do that again.
I find myself, in asking you questions, being a little bit protective. Are you really open? I mean, you're now really an academic. You're now an expert on the region and the country, as opposed to being a Foreign Service official or a diplomat. Are you restrained in any way? Will your book be restrained in any way?
I consider myself a free man. I don't consider myself a great expert on anything. I dabble in many things. I try to give people the best advice I can when they ask me. I have written a book. I'll go back to that book. I had put it on the back burner. It's basically written, but I've put it on the back burner at the time of the protocols. I think now I'll go back to it and try to bring it out in the next year or two.
We look forward to reading it. We look forward to hearing you speak publicly in the next couple of weeks. We'll bring excerpts from those events to our listeners. We're very happy that you're here, and we hope we'll continue this conversation with you over Skype and other ways.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.